Metroid Prime 4 is incredibly disappointing. If I had to use one word to describe it, the word I'd choose is outdated. And if I had to use two words, I'd say painfully uneven. The return of retro studios to the franchise after 15 years feels very much like it's the result of ideas that are 15 years old. This isn't a nostalgic return to form or a company unwilling to innovate. Its bare-bones attempts to modernize are rooted in some sort of Marvel movie ragtag group of annoyances. Its nostalgic sensibilities in a world without fast travel but nothing to warrant the decision. All of this while its contemporaries from Zelda to Mario to Pikmin, even 2D Metroid games that are now 4 years old, have managed to step into a new era, unafraid to blaze a path and set new trends. The kindest thing I can say about Metroid Prime 4 is that when you're deep in one of its dungeons, it can still evoke the atmosphere and ambiance that only Metroid Prime can. A first-person adventure puzzler that comforts you in how predictably it will play out, but with new locations in which to solve familiar puzzles. None of its highs, to me, come close to others in the first 3 games in the series, but the Prime flavor you can only get from the series is here sometimes. But it's tucked away between a heaping majority of misguided, ill-designed time wasting that shows that none of the lessons have been learned, leading to a game that neither builds on the legacy of the franchise nor attempts to make it stand with other great games from the last 15 years. It doesn't learn from the design ethos of Hollow Knight or Blasphemous or Metroid Dread. It doesn't learn from its cousins in the Soul series or the newly popular genre of Kingsfield-likes, which are first-person retro fantasy games that look to create the same sense of adventure, exploration, and progression that the Prime series does. It's learned nothing. And for a game that learned nothing, the feeling I had once I finished it was snuck between emptiness and relief. Now I know what some of you are thinking, oh no, Mug is going to criticize a Nintendo game? What else is new? Water's wet? But that's not true at all. I criticize Nintendo as a company, as a corporation. I criticize their greedy decisions, but their video games tend to be the whole point people still tolerate them. This very year, I thought Donkey Kong Bonanza was exceptional, if not really good enough to justify buying a Switch 2 for it. And honestly, in case you couldn't tell by the tone of this intro, I actually recommend Kirby Air Riders more than I do Metroid Prime 4. It's not for everybody, but it's incredibly fun. I don't tend to be very critical of Nintendo's games. This has been a huge surprise and an incredibly painful one. Metroid and Castlevania are 2 of my favorite series of all times, and they contributed to my love of Metroidvanias today and directly into my obsession with From Software and Souls-likes. Metroid Prime 1 specifically is an incredibly dear game to me that completely changed my perception of how video games could be, especially going from something like Super Metroid to Metroid Prime. It was a whole new world and a whole new perspective for a younger version of myself, coming from Mario 64 and then Ocarina of Time and then getting to see Metroid on the GameCube in a completely new light. And my expectations for this game were not sky high, but definitely not expecting what happened. I take absolutely no pleasure in what I'm going to say about Metroid Prime 4, but I think there's a lot of very important lessons to be learned from this game because it makes a hell of a lot of mistakes. And that's why we're going to dive into all of that. And by the way, hi, I'm Mug, and if you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new here, welcome back. It's great to see you. You're looking absolutely amazing. If you like the video at any point, hit the like button, helps the video spread throughout the YouTube algorithm. And if you really like the way that I cover news, reviews, and essays in the world of video games, consider subscribing, but maybe don't do it yet, because your time is really valuable, so make sure what I do is worth it. Finish the video, check out some other stuff on the channel, then subscribe. Today, I'm very sad, but you know what? Sometimes we gotta do what we gotta do, so let's get into it. Metroid Prime 4 places you once again in the boots of the legendary bounty hunter Samus Aran, who is helping out the Galactic Federation before being teleported to the planet of Vuros along with a crew of Gal-fed members. Here you uncover the legacy of the Lamorn and take on the mysteries of the planet, and the main antagonist that I won't spoil and all the while gathering members of the crew. The structure can be loosely described as Ocarina of Time, but Metroid. You start in Fury Green, a forested area, and from there you will travel to 4 other dungeons that are spread out in each corner of a connecting hub known as Soul Valley. These dungeons are themed around lightning, ice, fire, and a final dungeon, with you eventually getting the associated elemental abilities from each of them. These themed dungeons, the Volt Forge, the Ice Belt, and the Flare Pool, are the highlights of the game. You'll solve both navigational and more traditional puzzles as you make your way through them, although never anything that's going to break your brain, but you will be jotting down areas of interest for when you have more abilities, and when you head towards a final boss of the dungeon, you will be awarded with a new ability as well as a teleporter key, the main objective of the game. The bosses are more often than not an interesting puzzle to solve in themselves, with their own mechanics, patterns, and spectacle as you'd expect from the franchise, with only a few being seriously bad. And the theming for the dungeons is a decent highlight. The Ice Belt is a research facility that gives insight into the Grievers, the fodder enemies of the game, as well as Lemorn Tech. The Flare Pool explains the energy source that is crucial to their society, and the Volt Forge, aside from having the best soundtrack in the game, are these huge towers of lightning that serve as manufacturing centers for Lemorn Tech, and most important of all that tech is Viola. Viola is both Samus' new suit and her new motorcycle. And this is the most important part of the game and also one of the 2 new additions to the franchise. See, there's no new game-defining power-ups in Prime 4. There's no parry system, no new sort of boots or enhanced on-foot mobility. It's all stuff you've seen before, but slightly remixed with a couple of very iconic powers missing. You've got your elemental ammo for the arm cannon that can be upgraded into charged shots, and eventually, your super missiles and power bombs, now changed to be psychic, as is the general theme of the game that ties into the Beyond subtitle. But there are 2 new toys: the Control Beam, which allows you to fire a beam that slows down time as you manually control it, and Viola, the motorcycle. And this motorcycle is very present in the game because you'll need it to traverse Soul Valley, the massive desert that connects the game's areas, and here is where the very long list of problems begins. Now, it's come to my attention that there are many jokes being made about Soul Valley online, from how empty it is to how pointless it is, or the fact that Nintendo has continued with its abhorrent behavior and decided that if you want to listen to any music tracks while you're spending potentially hours out driving in the desert, you need to buy the Samus amiibo to unlock Viola Radio. While some people say that obtaining 100% scans or beating the game unlocks that radio as well, it appears that's not the case, and you actually unlock extra music tracks, but you can only use those extra tracks if you have the amiibo. Which, by the way, I'm not here to talk about those things, but I've seen a lot of people say that actually there's a ton of great music out in the desert, so just to make sure you're informed, here's an unedited clip of how the desert sounds. I've heard a lot of BS in my day, but this one might take the cake, man. I'm not here to reiterate those points, but to explain how actively harmful Soul Valley is to the rest of the game. You see, Soul Valley serves 3 main purposes. Firstly, it separates the different dungeons and contextualizes Vuros, which is fine and dandy. It's the Hyrule field of Metroid Prime 4. Its second job is to be home to small points of interest for optional exploration. There's 6 different shrines with small puzzles in each of them that house the charged and supercharged versions of each elemental shot, as well as small hidden upgrades. Its third function, however, is to house 2 mandatory objectives that are necessary to finish the game, those being 4 out of 6 mech parts needed to access the final boss, and the green crystals, of which you need to collect way too many in order to obtain 4 different upgrades, and the memory fruit, which is again necessary to finish the game. The mech parts aren't accessible until endgame, but the green crystals are everywhere from the start. This means that it's in your best interest to, whenever you're out and about, take the time to drive into the crystals and accumulate them, since you'll get some useful upgrades, but also you'll have to do so anyways eventually. And this is where I have to ask the question, what is at the core of a Metroidvania's loop? Looking at the primary examples of the genre, Super Metroid and Symphony of the Night, the basics of it all were in place well over 25 years ago. Basics that would see themselves reflected not just in the strictest followers of the genre, but in hundreds of games that took cues from them. The ability to explore a large map where you are constantly limited in how you progress, but never explicitly told where to go or what to do. This framework allows you, the player, the sense of progression and discovery that defines many games. You might obtain new abilities that open up new sections of the map and creative uses of them to find secrets. You might power up, from missile expansions in Metroid to new weapons in Castlevania to leveling up in a Souls-like. It's thanks to this framework that a staple of the genre is to re-explore previous areas after each major upgrade, hunting for secrets and other means of powering up. In this regard, Metroid Prime 4 fails catastrophically, and Soul Valley is a large part of that failure. After every upgrade, if you wanted to explore previous areas, you'd subject yourself to the arduous task of crossing Soul Valley multiple times to and from each area. I believe someone on the design team thought this would be justified and even interesting to the player by having that constant mission of collecting green crystals or the 6 optional shrines. While from an objective perspective, every time you are in the desert you want to collect green crystals, this forgets something very important. And the question is it fun to collect those crystals? And the short answer is no. The long answer is that it's an infuriating slog that destroys the pace of the game and constantly reminds you of the other biggest problem Metroid Prime 4 has, which is that it's not rewarding in the slightest, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. If you took the time to explore after every upgrade, the tedium would set in quickly. The slow transition cutscenes from dungeon to desert entrance, often multiple cutscenes, all for you to hold the right trigger and occasionally veer off path to collect green crystals as you head towards the next area and its long transitional cutscenes. Heading back to base camp to turn in those crystals becomes a nightmare, since it could mean a hefty chunk of time depending on how many detours for crystals you take, and then hopping off the bike, slowly walking to the altar to place those crystals, all to find out that you don't have enough of them to unlock the next upgrade. And after that, you walk all the way back out and drive back to where you were. Of course, here, having beaten the game, I can tell you that after the first upgrade you get for your Psychic Beam, it's better to wait till endgame when you can just get the giant green crystal chunks in the desert, meaning that the desert will often be an excessively extended loading screen and nothing else. But its biggest impact is how it now turns the joy of exploration and using your new abilities into a tedious chore. And the game seems aware of that. Your first companion, the engineer Mackenzie, will constantly radio in whenever you get to Soul Valley. He'll tell you where you should head next, he'll remind you to collect green crystals, or to head back to base camp for upgrades.
The bridge broken at the flare pool facility? You'll need to find some way to cross the lava lake. I believe upgrading the Viola suit allows you to unlock additional functions of the Viola. Wanna try making it?
The game itself, when you try to interact with something, will tell you that you don't have the required upgrade yet and you should come back later. It's guiding you to avoid people getting lost and frustrated and wasting their time heading in the wrong direction. Because Soul Valley and the slow, parsimonious entries and exits into each area destroy the flow of the game. This is something that is absent from other games, be they first or third-person adventures or 2D side-scrollers. In many Metroidvanias, including previous Metroid games, the design of the world was meant to feel expansive and mysterious at first, and then a speedrun circuit by the end. Your different abilities and powers allowing you to find new shortcuts, make previous obstacles trivial, and have a completely different perspective on how to navigate the map. In a different game with a similar open world but punctuated by dungeons, we have Elden Ring. Not only is the open world you explore littered with rewarding challenges and interesting locations, but those locations, if enterable, offer constant shortcuts to mark your progress, and the travel time is minimized with fast travel if you so wish. But it feels as though Prime 4 is too proud to admit defeat, too proud to offer fast travel. It's committed to its vision of immersion in this world, which I would normally applaud, but I've never wanted to be immersed in a muddy pile of quicksand. The most painful part of Metroid Prime 4 is how it handles rewards and progression, and to me this is the point where the core of it all feels outdated. If you were to return to explore areas, you'd constantly be pestered by enemies, but the combat in Metroid Prime 4 is not a forte. Even compared to Metroid Dread and its use of the parry, Metroid Prime 4 has no depth to its combat. Even Metroid Prime 3, often considered the worst of the series, took advantage of the Wiimote and nunchuck with the lasso and switching your beams mid-combat, along with the added precision of the Wiimote pointer. Prime 4, by comparison, is slow and uninteresting. You circle strafe and spam shots. Sometimes you switch to a different beam if an enemy is weak to it, and when you're too tired to engage, you use resources for one of your super attacks. But that doesn't stop the game from constantly putting you in situations where you fight waves upon waves of enemies, where the best solution is to spam your regular beam shots until you wear out your thumb or trigger finger. And that's if you're lucky enough to be fighting enemies that allow you to hit them instead of enemies that constantly teleport, giving you the smallest of openings and turning the fight into a 5-minute test of patience, or at least until you get the ice beam, but still. They're bad enough when they're mandatory sequences, and you're asking yourself when will it end, but the problems crown out of the metaphorical door once you start backtracking. Because once you do, you might ask the question, why am I fighting? You might just realize that you can just run towards the door and ignore enemies completely unless they're actively stopping you from doing whatever puzzle you're doing to obtain the next missile or shot expansion. But then, you might also wonder, why am I getting missiles and shot expansions? You might think it's either to get stronger or to get 100% completion, but I promise you, you don't need them to get stronger. With the limited depth there is to combat, Prime 4 is also not very difficult. If you fire fast enough, at most dodge here or there or stagger an enemy with a missile, but even in the worst case, with minimum exploration, you'll have enough energy tanks to just stand there and eat damage as enemies attack you until they're dead. This doesn't apply to boss fights where you're meant to engage with the puzzles and they can actually be decently tough, but the problems of difficulty never arise because you require more resources. Sure, energy tanks are valuable, but you don't need 200 missiles and 500 elemental ammo. You would never need that, and while I haven't submitted myself to beating the game on hard, I'd be surprised if they served a purpose there. And this is where comparing Samus Adventure on Vuros to games made in the last 15 years really stings. There is no real reward and progression for combat. There are fun bosses with puzzles, but the majority of combat is meaningless, a time waster, an impediment to your next goal that doesn't require skill and doesn't present a challenge. It's just a drain of your time on this earth. If we look at the recent, brilliant Hollow Knight Silksong, we see that everything serves a purpose in that game. Sure, enemies are meant to be an obstacle in Hornet's way, but the depth of combat is there for you to master defeating those enemies. If you do, the resource economy in the game rewards you with advantages for your next fight. You have your essence saved up for an offensive move in the next room, or ammo for your tools, and you obtain resources as a direct reward for combat, which you can use to power up further and face future challenges. There is a tangible reward for becoming better at the game's mechanics, both how your skill as a player improves and how your arsenal of tools presents more options and more power, and this loop continues until the end of the game. This is also the reason that running throughout the entirety of the map and backtracking works in Silksong. It's an opportunity to style on enemies, to feel the increase in power and skills, and a way of farming resources for what awaits you next, all tied in with your enhanced mobility and traversal skills. But in Prime 4, there is none of this. Combat can be catatonic. All you get for killing enemies is some health and missiles and ammo, none of which you'd need if you just walked past them. There is no fun to be had in dealing with the mindless annoyances that bite at your feet, neither at the start of the game nor at the end. And speaking of mindless annoyances, the Galactic Federation crew is often a nightmare to interact with. Samus is a mute in the Prime games, and that continues here, and so you spend a decent amount of time in the game being talked at by the Galactic Federation crew. Mackenzie will constantly radio you and pester you with where you're meant to go. Takobi will tell you his sob story by encountering him in Soul Valley at Endgame. Armstrong will fangirl over Samus the legendary bounty hunter and tell you to be careful out there. But there's no real cohesion or camaraderie amongst the crew, and the only one I cared for in the slightest was View, who is the literal emotionless robot, and that should tell you all you need to know. But what I find confusing is the amount of people saying that this has no place in a Metroid game, that it's the foreboding sense of isolation that defines the alien adventures of Samus Aran, when that isn't true, and it's also not mutually exclusive with having companions. Metroid Dread arguably has the most interesting story in the series, and it has plenty of speaking characters that delve into the past of Samus and her upbringing as a Chozo, not as a human. Sure, Other M was a disaster to most people, but Prime 2 and 3 featured plenty of characters and text, and even games like Fusion and Zero Mission have characters that we communicate with. The Galfed crew doesn't suck because they exist, but because of terrible execution. Their happy-go-lucky, "whoops, dropped my gun, haha, Sam is so lucky that you're here" attitude that seems ripped from a Russo brothers film is what sucks. Once again, a design about 15 years outdated from the times of the Avengers being the hottest property on the block. If this same crew were written and acted differently, terrified but capable, finding moments of levity and world building amongst the panic of a hostile world and the awe of a legendary bounty hunter, it could easily be the most memorable Metroid story. But instead, we get a cookie-cutter group of stereotypes playing comic book roles in a series that people perceive as just a tad bit deeper than what is portrayed. The nerdy, awkward engineer that loves tech, the hardened loner sniper, the young fangirl cadet, and the hard-ass sergeant. Tell me something I haven't seen 22 times in sci-fi. Screw that, tell me something I haven't seen done 3 different times in Halo. And please, try and make it a bit more alien and a bit less Starship Troopers next time. And so, if the exploration is hindered by awful design and pacing, and its combat is mind-numbing, if its story is a mediocre cliché, why would you play Metroid Prime 4? Well, in short, you wouldn't. I got 3 hours of fun out of a 13-hour game, and I'm sure I got more tedium and time to question my life choices than I did fun. A pretty world and decent theming as a wrapper for what is the skeleton of a Metroid game isn't enough. Sure, we get to hit all the beats, we get our super missiles and our spider ball, and we get to grapple stuff and solve some cool puzzles to get meaningless upgrades, but it feels hollow. It feels like the band has grown old and they're playing the classics in a new venue. And sure, some of the audience will blindly cheer and celebrate that there's even still a concert to attend. But if you look beyond the pretty lights of the stage, you can see the musicians have lost all spark and all soul. But I guess once the concert is done, they can still ride their shiny motorcycles and pretend they've still got it. In case it isn't clear, I do not recommend Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. I think it's a very, very big step back for the series, and I don't appreciate most of what it does. Some people could argue that it makes the Metroid formula more accessible by hand-holding, by making the overall puzzles easier, by reducing the difficulty of the game overall. Maybe even it's an overcorrection to some of the reactions to Metroid Dread, which some people consider to be difficult. Whatever the case may be, I don't think it's good. If you're hungering for a Metroidvania, go ahead and play Hollow Knight Silksong, or go and play Constance, which just came out, or Blasphemous. If you're looking for some first-person adventuring, go play something like Verho Curse of Faces, or look up Queen's Domain that's got a demo out and it's coming out next year. There's plenty of really cool options to fill in the void that Metroid Prime has left, and sure, we all wanted Metroid Prime 4 to be the one to bring it all back, but I really don't think it is. Hopefully the Metroid franchise is still fine, and we get another 2D Metroid down the line, and maybe even a new Prime game that picks up where 3 left off. But 4 isn't it. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, and also, maybe now consider subscribing. An extra special thanks to the members on the wall, be they members here on YouTube or on Patreon, but these are the people that directly support me and everything that I do here on the channel, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. Meanwhile, hope you enjoyed this review, and go out there, and enjoy some great video games, especially now around, this time of the holidays. It's really not the moment to be sad about how they butchered one of your favorite franchises. It's fine. It's all good. And I'll see you again very soon.